She was standing behind the head of the boardroom table on a Thursday morning in Toronto, holding a small silver tray with 1 cup of black coffee and 1 cup of green tea. And everyone in that room except her already knew what was about to happen. Peggy Cole reached for her coffee without looking up. She had done this every single morning for 3 years. She did not say thank you. She never had. The chairman cleared his throat and looked toward the woman still standing quietly by the door with the empty tray in her hands. "Before we begin today's agenda," he said, "there is one more item." He looked directly at her. "Abena, please, come and sit down." Peggy's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. This is her story. Her full name was Abena Mensah. She was 31 years old, born in Kumasi, Ghana, and raised partly there and partly in Scarborough on the eastern edge of Toronto, Canada, after her mother moved the family across the ocean when Abena was 9. Her mother worked 2 jobs for 11 years to keep them housed and fed, cleaning offices downtown at night, caring for elderly patients during the day. She never once told Abena that any of it was hard. She only ever said one thing about work, over and over, until it became the quiet law of their small apartment.
Wherever they place you, place your whole self there, even if it is small. Especially if it is small.
Abena carried that sentence with her the way other people carry a favorite photograph. She carried it into her first job at 19, folding towels at a hotel. She carried it into her years studying business administration part-time at night, 1 course at a time, while working full days. And she carried it into Lac Hill Freight Solutions, a mid-sized logistics company near the harbor, where she was hired at 24 as an executive floor assistant, the person who managed schedules, prepared the boardroom, answered phones, and yes, made the tea and coffee for the senior leadership team every single morning. It was not a job most people dreamed of, but Abena had learned something her mother had taught her without ever using the word for it. She had learned that the size of a job says nothing about the size of the person doing it. Every morning, she arrived 40 minutes before anyone else. She knew exactly how each executive took his coffee, who wanted oat milk, who liked their tea steeped for precisely 3 minutes and not a second longer, who liked their newspaper folded to the business section before they walked in. She remembered the small things, birthdays, the names of people's children, whether someone had a rough week and needed a little extra warmth in how she greeted them at the door. Peggy Cole was the director of regional operations, and she had never once in 3 years learned Abena's name correctly the first time. She called her Amina for the first 8 months. When corrected, she said, "Same thing more or less," and laughed and moved on to something more important. Peggy was not cruel in the loud way. She was cruel in the comfortable way, the way of someone who had decided quietly and without ever examining it that certain people existed in a room to serve and certain people existed in a room to be served, and that the boundary between the 2 groups was simply how the world worked. She spoke over Abena in hallway conversations. She left her coffee cup on Abena's desk without a word, as if the desk itself was a shelf built for that purpose. Once, in front of 2 clients, she said,
"Abena keeps this floor running. She's basically
and
our
smiled
office
as though
mom."
she had paid a great compliment, never noticing that a compliment that shrinks a person is really not a compliment at all. Abena said nothing. She poured the coffee, she refilled the tray. She went home at the end of each day, and on the bus, she opened her small blue notebook and studied. Because there was something happening in Abena's life that nobody on that executive floor knew about. 2 years earlier, Lac Hill's chairman, a quiet, observant man named Francis Darko, himself Ghanaian Canadian, though few at the company ever thought to ask, had noticed something in her. Not her tea, her mind. He had noticed the way she reorganized the filing system on the 14th floor without being asked, cutting retrieval time nearly in half without asking. He had noticed the handwritten notes she left in the margins of meeting agendas she prepared, small, sharp observations about scheduling conflicts and resource waste that no one else had caught. He asked once, with careful respect, whether the company had ever considered restructuring its regional delivery routes to save on fuel costs. And when he asked her to explain, her explanation was better than the one his own logistics team had presented that quarter. Francis did not make a scene. He did something quieter. He enrolled Abena without announcement in the company's internal executive readiness program, a track normally reserved for management trainees with business degrees and formal titles, not floor assistants who fetched coffee. He paid the tuition for her final business certification himself, privately, and told her only this: finish it. Say nothing yet. Some doors open better when nobody is standing in front of them shouting. For 2 years, Abena studied on buses, in break rooms, on Sunday afternoons at the small kitchen table in the apartment she shared with her mother, now retired, who watched her daughter's tired eyes each night and never once asked why. She simply made tea of her own in the same worn ceramic pot her own mother had carried from Kumasi 30 years before, and set a cup beside her notebook without a word. That pot was the only thing in the apartment that crossed the ocean twice, once with Abena's grandmother from a village outside Kumasi to the capital, and once again with her mother from Ghana to Canada. It had a small chip on the spout, and her mother refused every offer to replace it. She said some things are not supposed to look new. They are supposed to look like they survived something. Meanwhile, on the 14th floor, Peggy Cole was building a plan of her own. The company was preparing to promote someone into the newly created role of Managing Director for the Eastern Region, a position with real authority, real visibility, and a seat at the parent company's international table. Peggy wanted it badly. She had been circling it for over a year, positioning herself in every meeting, taking credit in careful, deniable ways for work that was not entirely hers, and quietly working to remove anyone she saw as competition, real or imagined. She did not see Abena as competition. She did not see her really, except as furniture that occasionally spoke. But Peggy did see a use for her. When a formal complaint needed filing against a rival colleague she wanted removed from consideration, a fabricated claim about missed deadlines dressed up carefully in professional language, Peggy needed someone to type it up, file it, and forget it. She chose Abena, assuming, the way she assumed most things about her, that the woman who brought her coffee every morning would simply do as told and never think twice. Just get this typed up and sent to HR before end of day, Peggy said, sliding a folder across the desk without meeting her eyes. Abena read the folder that evening before filing it, the way she read everything carefully, out of the same habit that had taught her to notice fuel costs nobody else had noticed. She saw immediately that the dates did not add up. She saw that the missed deadlines being claimed against the rival colleague did not match the project timeline she herself had prepared 6 weeks earlier, one Peggy apparently had forgotten Abena had written. She said nothing to Peggy. She simply made a quiet copy of the true timeline, dated it, and placed it in her own small folder at home beside her notebook. She had learned from watching her mother carry a chipped teapot across 2 oceans that some things you keep not because you plan to use them, but because the truth deserves somewhere safe to live. 3 weeks later, completely irrelated to any of this, Francis Dako called Abena into his office and told her that she had completed the internal executive readiness program with the highest marks the internal reviewers had recorded in 5 years. The board, he said, wanted her to present her cost restructuring proposal, the one about delivery routes, directly to the regional leadership panel the following month. Peggy heard about this the way she heard about most things, secondhand in a hallway. She was not alarmed. If anything, she was pleased. A presentation from the coffee girl, as she called Abena to a colleague with a small laugh, would be a harmless bit of theater before the real decision, her own promotion, was finalized. She even offered to help Abena prepare, in a tone that help was a favor Abena did not deserve but would receive anyway. But what Peggy did not know was that the timeline document from the fabricated complaint had by then already reached Francis's desk through a completely different route. Abena's rival colleague, cleared of the false claim after quietly requesting a records review, had thanked her for the corrected version she had discreetly provided months earlier, and mentioned in passing gratitude that Abena had caught the whole thing before it went anywhere. Francis said nothing about it publicly. He simply began paying closer attention to 2 things at once: the strength of Abena's proposal and the quiet pattern of Peggy Cole's behavior to the people around her. The presentation took place in the same boardroom Abena had prepared coffee for in 3 years on a Thursday morning in early spring. She did not carry a tray that day. She carried a folder and a laptop, and she stood at the head of the table where Peggy usually sat, and she walked the regional panel through a delivery route restructuring that would save the company just over $400,000 a year, using data she had gathered quietly, evenings and weekends, without anyone asking her to. Peggy sat 3 seats down, arms crossed, smiling the tight smile of someone still confident the theater would end exactly where she expected. It did not occur to her, even as she watched Abena speak with calm, precise authority, that the room's silence was not politeness, it was attention. After the meeting, the chairman asked Abena to remain behind for a few minutes. Peggy lingered near the door, assuming she would be asked to weigh in as she always was. "Peggy," Francis said, "thank you, that will be all for now." Peggy left the room. She did not yet understand what she had just walked out of. The following 2 weeks were quiet ones. Peggy continued preparing for what she believed was her inevitable promotion, meeting with the regional board twice, subtly reminding them of her tenure, her visibility, her years of service. She mentioned once, almost as an aside, that she hoped the company understood the importance of putting the right face on such a significant new role, a face, she implied without saying it directly, that belonged in front of international clients rather than behind a coffee tree. Francis listened to all of it without expression. He was by then holding 2 files on his desk. One was Abena's completed leadership assessment, and along with the corrected project timeline she had quietly preserved, the other was a separate growing record describing a pattern of credit-taking and quiet sabotage connected to Peggy Cole's name across the past 18 months. He made his decision alone, the way decisions like that are usually made, without an audience, without drama, in the ordinary quiet of an office at the end of a long day. On the following Thursday, the same day of the week Abena had served coffee in that boardroom for 3 straight years, the full regional leadership team was called together. Peggy arrived early, dressed carefully, certain of what she was about to hear. The chairman began the meeting the way he began most meetings, without ceremony. He thanked everyone for their patience during the search process. He confirmed that the board had reached its decision on the new managing director role for the Eastern region. Then he turned toward the door. "Abena, please, come and sit down." Peggy's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. The room did not gasp. Nobody laughed. Nobody clapped loudly or made a show of the moment, because that was never how justice moved in that building, and it was never how Abena carried herself either. She simply walked to the seat she had once only ever stood behind, and sat down, and folded her hands the way she had folded 1,000 napkins on 1,000 ordinary mornings, and said only, "Thank you, I won't disappoint this team." Peggy did not resign that day. She stayed on for another 4 months, in a role now reporting in effect to the woman who used to bring her coffee. She was polished about it in public. Privately, colleagues noticed she grew quieter, smaller somehow, the way people do when the story they had been telling themselves about their own importance finally meets the truth. She left the company that autumn for a role at a smaller firm across the city, a lateral move dressed up as an opportunity. Nobody at Larkhill asked her to explain. Nobody needed to. The record spoke for itself, and Abena had never once needed to raise her voice to make it speak. On Abena's first morning as managing director, her assistant, a young woman new to the company, nervous, eager to make an impression, asked if she should prepare tea and coffee for the morning meeting. Abena smiled and said, "I'll make it myself today. I know exactly how everyone takes it." She carried the tray in herself that morning, out of habit more than anything else, and set the cups down at each place around the table with the same care she always had. Then she took her own seat at the head of it, in front of the same chair she used to stand behind, and began the meeting. That evening, she went home to the small apartment in Scarborough, where her mother still kept the chipped ceramic pot on the same kitchen shelf it had always occupied. She made 2 cups of tea, poured them exactly how her mother liked them, and set one down at the table without a word, the way her mother had done for her for years. Her mother looked at her for a long moment, then simply nodded, the way she had nodded the day Abena boarded a different bus years earlier on her way to a job folding towels. Some sacrifices do not need loud recognition. They only need, eventually, to be understood. Abena Mensah never once in 3 years of pouring coffee for people who barely saw her believed that the size of her job defined the size of her future. She simply did the small work in front of her with her whole self, exactly as her mother had taught her, and let the years decide what that discipline would eventually become. If this story reminded you of someone carrying more than the room around them realizes, share it with them today. Because somewhere right now, someone is folding napkins, pouring coffee, answering phones, being quietly overlooked, and building without announcement the very thing that will one day make the room stand up when they finally sit. Some victories don't make noise. They simply change everything. See you in the next Payoff Story. This is Payoff Stories, where every sacrifice finds its reward and every story has its payoff.